Hello everybody and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Video Clips, and we have some upcoming events I know you want to know about. So let's start with next week, Tuesday, June 11th, Dr. Pam Warwick, who is a licensed psychologist in Ohio, is going to do a telephone workshop on psychiatric drugs, how they've made patient outcomes worse, how you can avoid taking them, and also some information about withdrawal. The second thing is Introduction to Plant-Based Nutrition is scheduled for Thursday next week on June 13th. This is the 90 minutes, get started off on the right track and doing the right things to convert to a plant-based diet, understanding the science and skills you need. And last but not least, Tuesday, June 18th, Conversations with Dr. Pam. I'm going to talk about energy levels and what they should be and how to increase them. And then for the rest of the time, we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. So today my goal is to finish up the series on catastrophic care. I bet I've sold 500 books for this guy. Everybody who I've talked to about it has read it. I've gotten so many people emailing me telling me how much they like this book, and I really think it's a must read. I've kind of finished my notes with that. But as you remember, when we were talking about this last week, and I've spent a lot of time on this book because I think it is so important. We can't fix the system if we don't know what's wrong with it, and we have a lot of people screaming and hollering about the wrong things. So Goldhill proposes a big change with individual accounts and sort of throwing out the system we have and installing a new one. And gosh, I think this is a system we should throw out. It is a big change, but it does provide people with what everyone agrees we should have, which is cradle-to-grave health care. But because it involves individual accounts, it turns all Americans into consumers of health services. There are problems with this, obviously. There are going to be problems no matter how we change the system. But Goldhill argues, and I think he's right, that we are all going to be so much better stewards of our own money than when we turn it over to the surrogates, the insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid, and we'll let them try to handle things for us. Goldhill compares healthcare to the policies that led to the financial and housing crisis. Helping somebody purchase a home sounds like a good idea, but helping everybody who wants to buy a home to do so turned out to be a disaster. And in the long run, not only did some of the people who purchased homes and shouldn't have done so got hurt, but also millions of other people lost their jobs in construction and lending. People lost their life savings when the government didn't prop up the cost of housing anymore. And so that's what's happening in healthcare. We don't want to say no to anybody. Just by way of example, the FDA finally issued a statement that Avastin was useless for treating breast cancer, and Medicare turned right around and said we're going to pay for it anyway. Well, it's not only bad for the person getting the useless care, but when you burden the system financially with this kind of stuff, how can it possibly be reasonable ever, financially, for people to contract for healthcare? Goldhill analyzes the Affordable Care Act in an appendix called Unintended Consequences. I'm always talking about the law of unintended consequences when it comes to legislation. He believes that the ACA may actually cause fewer employers to offer insurance and healthier people to decide that they don't need it and just to pay the fines instead. He uses an example of a person who makes $100,000 a year. Family coverage would be $15,000, but to pay the penalties only $2,500. That's an annual savings of $12,500. Powerful incentives. So you might be thinking, what if somebody in the family develops a catastrophic illness? Well, the insurance companies can't turn anybody down for pre-existing conditions anymore, so the person would just be able to get insurance. Well, the problem is if sick people who need coverage right now are the people buying insurance, eventually the costs are going to go up to the place where nobody can afford it. And he used, premiums will, there's a similar scenario that he uses explaining homeowners insurance. For example, if the only time people purchased homeowners insurance was when their house is on fire, eventually, since everybody who's paying in would be making huge claims from the beginning, the cost of homeowners insurance would prohibit people with houses that aren't on fire from being able to purchase, and eventually homeowners insurance would just cease to exist. In another appendix, Goldhill addresses the fallacy that the ACA will control costs. It's not going to. I mean, one example is the mandate that insurance companies offer preventive and wellness services for free. Does anybody really think this stuff is free? Where is healthcare free? And who's going to do all this free work? He says the promised benefits are nonsense. Tests like PSAs and mammograms, not worth the cost for most people and harmful to many. And making them free just encourages more people to make more use of the useless and potentially harmful services. The ACA doesn't allow employers to reward behavior because there can't be a hint of discrimination, like you're going to penalize somebody who smokes or is obese. Goldhill states that for years, legislation has been passed with the intent of making healthcare better, cheaper, more efficient. None of it has happened, and it's incomprehensible that the architects of the ACA thought that it was actually going to make things different. The last appendix argues that just as government has failed at regulating almost everything, including the airlines, deregulation, by the way, you might remember, I talked about this in an earlier segment, allowed airlines to compete on prices, which, as it turned out, is what people really care about. We just need to get government out of regulating industry, period. Government should be limited to doing only a few things. We've just let it grow way too big. Well, in the case of the airlines, when you try to take care of everybody, you don't take care of anybody. So the government was trying to protect the airlines, the pilots, the flight attendants, consumers. Well, the same thing with healthcare. The government can't represent insurance companies, hospitals, medical doctors, drug companies, device makers, and consumers equally well. And they're not doing a good job for anybody. Well, maybe they're doing a great job for the drug companies, but personally, I'm a consumer. I care more about myself than the drug companies. People argued that when the airlines were deregulated, that safety would suffer. But in fact, there have been fewer accidents every year since deregulation. I think it's a myth that the government is protecting us against disaster. Well, this year the government will spend $32 billion on research to address diseases like cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's. And my personal comment about this is that most of that research money is misdirected and useless. But more people, and this is to Goldhill's point, more people die of medical error than these conditions. There aren't any incentives to address this issue. The government won't even release the names of health providers who've been flagged for performing excessive or risky tests or procedures. The American Medical Association has been behind the effort to keep this information a secret, and this infuriates me. In 1979, they filed a lawsuit that prohibits the release of much data pertaining to doctors. This ban even extends to allowing members of the public to see which doctors have been sanctioned for malpractice. That's unconscionable. Goldhill goes on to say that his company knows how many people visit its website, who they are, how long they stay on the site, and from which site they navigated to his. And there's just no reason why more information about health can't be made available to the American public so that consumers can make better and more informed decisions. This represents a very paternal attitude toward all of this that government takes, and it personally infuriates me, which is that data is for experts and consumers can't have it. The ACA essentially takes a stand against commercializing health and subjecting it to the same forces that govern all other industries. I personally think this book should be sent to every member of Congress and every employee of a government agency that participates somehow in regulating the healthcare system. I don't think those agency bureaucrats would pay much attention to it, but they should be forced to read it. It should be part of economics curricula in universities and required reading for citizens. Goldhill's book shows that the collapse of the medical system will be similar to the collapse of the financial and housing systems, and that this collapse is imminent if we do not change course. Some people have already done so, people like me. I dropped out of the system. I don't worry about what insurance pays for. I go to the practitioners I need to see when I have something wrong. I don't participate in the useless and harmful diagnostic testing and medical care that is directed at people my age. Americans need to focus on becoming optimally healthy and keep an arm's length relationship to the healthcare industry and medical doctors. They need to leave island life behind and move to the mainland where the things that make sense tend to go on instead of life on the healthcare island. So I thank you very much for indulging me and allowing me to talk about this very excellent book to the extent that I have. I think it's absolutely crucial for people to understand these concepts. We don't need more insurance, we don't need better insurance, we don't need more health care, we need less health care. We need to stay away from the healthcare system to the extent that we can. And so get the book, Catastrophic Care, recommend it to others. I'm convinced that if most people in this country understood this, things would start to change faster. Well, that's all for now. Pass it on to anybody who you think would enjoy watching it, and I'll be back to you on Thursday.